That may or may not be true, but I figured that would wake you up, right? Definitely not true, just in case you're wondering, right? Especially for the kids in the room. But I do want to chat with you a little bit about what I call the DNA of Spiritism. But then, what do you mean the DNA of Spiritism? Spiritism is not a physical thing, and we know that our bodies have DNA, but what do you mean? Well, I mean the DNA as in the makeup, as the origin, as the blueprint for what Spiritism is. And why do I think that's important? I think that's important because in many different ways, we sometimes study Spiritism and we think about the context and the lessons that we learn. And sometimes it can be very painful to go through those lessons. But we don't often think about how it came about or what are some of these characteristics that have made it really special. So it's sort of like the hidden message of Spiritism is to look at its DNA and see the process through which it came about and it is structured and how it works so that we can apply that to a life. Because I do think that there's also a lesson there for how we could carry ourselves and act in the world in ways conducive to our own growth, right? So if you have the patience, we are going to try to make it as painless as possible so that we can then go into perhaps some interaction, perhaps some questions and answers and some connections together, because I think that has a lot to do with the DNA of Spiritism, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So the DNA of Spiritism. So we're really going to talk about what Spiritism is, why it matters, and why does it matter now. That's the goal, right? If we touch any of those, then I think we are going to be in for a good day. So then what do you think Spiritism is? I think the great thing is if we are going to talk about Spiritism, it may be good to slightly define what are we talking about. And for me, Spiritism is a science which deals with the nature, origin, and destiny of spirits, as well as their relationship to the corporeal world, to the physical world. And that is a definition that we take from that guy, Allan Kardec, in this wonderful little book that says, what is Spiritism in the preamble in the beginning? And I would make a slight modification for nowadays to make it more palatable. And I would perhaps call Spiritism as a body of knowledge which deals with the nature, origin, and destiny of spirits. Why? Because the word science today has changed slightly from what we used to understand in the past. And today when we say the word science, we think about test tubes and machines and calculations. And I think that is a little bit of a loss because science is a method. It's a way of thinking. And so I think that body of knowledge is a great way of putting it. And I like to use the word progressive. And mind you, there is no political connotation with the word progressive here. I want to go back to the idea of progressive in the sense that it's always progressing, it is growing. So I want to be very mindful and very clear and upfront with you here. It's nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with physical thinking. I call physical thinking in the sense of thinking of the physical world. It is about the spirit. And the spirit has no political party. Right? So let's take a little quick walk down memory lane and talk about what it is, right? So Spiritism really came about in 1857, officially, we like to say it, when this book called the Spirits Book was published at the Dentu bookstore at the Palais Royal in Paris. It's a lovely little place in Paris. You can't go there today. You won't have any plaques. You won't really know where it is, but that's where it came from. And in its first edition, the Spirits Book had 501 items. Now it has 1,019. So it's a really interesting point because the Spirits Book has also evolved during Kardec's time, right? Again, progressive. You see what I'm getting at here, right? But what I think is really interesting is the Spirits Book, it's called the Spirits Book, and it's now called Kardec's Book, right? As a matter of fact, Kardec was not even his name. The spirits, during the process, told him, Mr. Rivail, thank you, but you don't get to put your name on it because this is not your work. This is our work, and you have been the editor-in-chief, so to speak, but use a name from your previous life, because you have to have one. But that's why it's called the Spirits Book. And that's really telling in many different ways, because the way in which the Spirit's book was put together, and we sometimes don't think about this, was through that process of experimentation and science that we talked about before. How did it happen? There were some strange phenomena taking place in Paris and other places, and they convinced this guy, Professor Rivail, to look at it. He's like, no, thank you. I am busy being an educator and doing all kinds of things which he was famous for at the time. Eventually, they bothered him so much that he observed this phenomena, and as he saw this phenomena take place, basically objects moving and tables moving, he realized something was at play. And gifted with an incredible intellect and an ability to understand things and abstract meaning from stuff, he quickly shared some powerful ideas. And he said, well, every consequence has a cause, right? So if I push a ball's moving, like I pushed it, something happened, right? So every consequence has a cause. And every intelligent consequence must have an intelligent cause. That's kind of smart. So if we are pushing the ball in a specific direction, then the ball doesn't have a brain, so the cause must have been intelligent to push it in that direction. The same thing was with what's happening with the moving and tipping tables at the time. They were seeing tables making movements, and he thought first was fraud. He checked it out, it wasn't. He went to different places and different meetings and saw the same thing. So he started to conduct a scientific experiment of going to different places with different people, asking the same questions and looking at the same things and seeing what kind of results he got. And because he knew that tables cannot move by themselves, somebody was acting on those tables. So if it was not fraud, if not somebody pretending here in the incarnate world that the tables were moving by themselves, then there must be something else that is unknown to us that is moving those tables. And he started to make questions. Table, is it true that it's sunny outside today? If yes, move to the left. If not, move to the right, right? And then started to do this and started to do it in different places. And then say, and you can understand how difficult it is because tables don't talk, at least not in my house. I do the talking in my house after my wife has had her say. My talk is generally, yes, honey, exactly, you're right. But you get the point, right? Eventually they come up with a method of knocks, like knock 3 times for the letter C, 4 times for the letter 4. Like spiritual technology has evolved quite a bit, right? And through that long process, we got these answers that were this discarnate or without a body entities or intelligences that were called spirits. They were us after they have passed. And they were trying to call our attention to the fact that life goes on. And so Spiritism was born. 1857 is the date that is nice for us Spiritists because that's the publication of the first version of the Spirit's book. And it was quite an interesting thing. And nowadays, right, by 2021, I probably should have edited 2025 there, but we have 1,019 questions on our current edition of the Spirit's book, which we stopped editing after the 3rd edition, and we have it divided in 4 parts, which is a story in itself. Really, we have millions of copies sold, millions of people throughout the world reading this. I mean, I know I'm preaching to the choir. You probably know all this stuff. But it is a wonderful book that deals with a lot of different things, and it's organized in a very beautiful and intentional way with 4 parts that deal first with everything that's basic. Then, since there are spirits, they'll talk about the spiritual world, how do they act and behave, and the moral laws, and what it means to act one way or the other. The 4th part, hopes and solaces. But my point here is the key to Spiritism and to this new perspective is all coming from that one book. But what is at the highest level in there? Well, the key learnings really is the immortality of the spirit. And we're all immortal spirits, you know that, right? That there is such a thing as reincarnation because that's how we learn and grow. It's also how we can see the divine justice manifest. We can understand why we have different opportunities in this lifetime. If we are just looking at one lifetime, we can see there might not be a very just way of going about life. But once we understand that every cause whatever consequence has a cause, we can connect our multiple lives and see how we got to this if we could look back in time. So incarnation is a really important thing. We can talk more about that. I'm going to zoom through this because I really want to make time for us. No surprise there, mediumship. It's a big deal for us. It's understanding how this communication between the physical and the spiritual takes place. It is the core of how we've got this information from the beginning. So it's no surprise that the second book after the Spirit's book that Kardec put together was a manual of how mediumship works. And it is called the Medium's Book. And it was the first treatise ever presented in the history of humankind about how that communication takes place. Mediumship has always existed, but understanding how it works had been a privilege of few. But with this book, Kardec democratized that knowledge so that anyone who was willing to learn could do it. It's pretty powerful stuff. To this date, I think it's grossly undervalued. To this day, people still think that mediumship is somewhat of a mystical thing that only a few have. And through this book, we learn many things. Like all of us are mediums in different degrees. That is, all of us feel the impact or the interference or the effect of the spiritual world in us just in different degrees, which means that we may not see, hear spirits, but we feel them. We sometimes feel them. But anyways, I digress. And also, besides mediumship, we also have, again, this idea that there is a God, a designing, guiding principle of the universe that orchestrates everything. You can use whatever name you want for that, right? God sometimes is a loaded word, but there is a force, it is not human, that has created everything and it's controlling everything. It's all just and all kind. And of course, we also ask about what kind of models for our own behavior and our growth can we leverage? And I think one big takeaway is Jesus is perhaps the best guide, but not the only one, mind you. That is very important for us to highlight too, because Jesus has also come to be a loaded word. Right? We have confused it through time in many different religions and aspirations and denominations, but the way he lived, it's a really powerful way for us to do that, how we live too. But we're going to park that, because today we're not talking necessarily about Jesus, the historic figure or the religious figure. We're really just thinking about what kind of new thinking Spiritism has brought us. So we know a lot about the context of Spiritism. If you're here, you probably have been exposed to many different talks, different books, different study groups about how all of that, none of that probably is new to you. But here's what I would love to call your attention to, because I think this is fascinating. And you may say, no, Dan, it is not fascinating. And that's okay. I will live with that. But I really think that Spiritism was a new thinking. It's the beginning of a new thinking for a new era. What do I say for that? Because until then, as far as I know, any kind of spiritual or religious thinking about God and so forth, had been the result of a revelation. Somebody that had an experience and heard directly from God or something. And from there on, that person became the holder of that truth. And everybody else that came after them was trying to interpret what they said and what they did, and try to stay true to that and nothing else. With Spiritism, we do sort of the opposite. We want to honor the beginning, but Spiritism hasn't stopped with Kardec. It is supposed to grow and continue to amass new information as we go around, taking a scientific perspective in the sense that we are welcoming new data every time. As a matter of fact, to this date, we have wonderful figures and people who have added tremendously to Spiritism. And it might be that perhaps your first encounter with Spiritism was not by a work by Kardec. Maybe you read one of Andrew Lewis' book, or maybe you read a romance from Victor Hugo, the writer. There's so many different ways for you to enter into Spiritism, rather than the technical understanding of how it works, because we have been able to add to it with time. And that's what we want to talk about today, because in many different ways, Spiritism was born of inquiry. It was about questions about, hey, why are these tables moving? What's happening here? Obviously, a table cannot move, so what's happening? So let's be curious about all of this. Let's try to understand what is happening here. So it's about inquiry. It's not about like somebody said so and hence it is. The other interesting characteristic is it's facts-based. When there are new facts, we change our views. We don't try to reinterpret the truth to fit the facts that we started with. And that's a biggie for religious thinking, right? And so it's important for us to see that. Something else, too, that's interesting is that it's progressive. It has to evolve. It is not meant to be steady and stagnant. It is not meant to stay just in Kardec. We love Kardec, but Kardec is the stepping stone. It is the sound structure upon which we build. But like I said, Andrew Lewis, Emmanuel, Joanna de Angelis, and so many wonderful authors and spirits, and even you, with your own contribution, can add to Spiritism. And here's something else to kind of break it down in modern terms. Spiritism is open source. There is no central agency that controls or owns Spiritism. That makes it really interesting. Because there is no Vatican. There is no central point. There is no United Nations of Spiritism. There are governing bodies that try to bring the movement together, that is, a group of people, but the ideas of Spiritism belong to no one but the folks out there. Which means that there are no authorities in Spiritism. There is no Spiritist boss. Right? For our organization groups, we have leaders and so forth because they have to organize groups. But in terms of content and philosophy, there is no one who says, this is right, this is wrong. It's about us learning and saying, well, I see this in many different places. It makes sense to me. Right? Which is beautiful and very hard because sometimes we just want an answer. Tell me this is wrong. Tell me this is right. Right? It is a really great world when we can see things very clearly between black and white. But it's not always the case. There's always nuances, even though there are absolutes. And it's up to us to get there. So it is open source. And because of that, it's also flat and democratic. Again, you could change the course of Spiritism by giving a great contribution in thinking to the field. If you notice something that nobody has or you want to add to it, and you're able to express that and share that with others, and people find it's worthwhile, it may just become part of their wonderful body of knowledge. Isn't that different? And it's practical. It should be for everyday use. It's not a philosophical endeavor only. It's not a rhetoric or abstract or academic project. It is something that we struggle with. It is something that we build on. And then something that we say, what am I going to use this for? And that is sometimes harder than it thinks. So what do I mean by that? I mean that, it really was born of inquiry, right? So it is about curiosity and the desire to know. And if Spiritism started with those questions, I wonder if there isn't a lesson there for us too. Are we also in inquiry mode? Are we also curious about Spiritism and life around us? Can we also express that desire to know and say, how does this work? What else is true about this? I think that lesson was also intentional. I think that the spirits, when they came with Spiritism and decided how it was going to be shared with all of us, they were intentional in modeling for us that we ought to inquire and run after things and start to triangulate and see what is true and what is not. I also fathom that they have been trying to do this for a while. That's why they give us different messengers to different religions and so forth. So we're able to discern. And even those of us who are fascinated by the words of the Christ will know that there are 4 different evangelists in the New Testament that tell the story of Jesus. There is not one single voice that tells us how Jesus lived. Almost as if the spirits have been whispering for millennia now, you have to make your own decisions. Because those 4 evangelists, for instance, they don't agree on everything. They don't tell us the same story. Some things are present in some things are present in all, some things are present in just one of them or 2 of them. And yet, they're all valuable. So the inquiry piece should be something that maybe we can turn into our lives too, if we want to truly follow this idea of spiritual growth in a way that Spiritism has set forth to us. Are we asking enough questions? Are we asking enough questions of Spiritism? How do I know what I know? Why is this true? Are we asking enough questions of ourselves? Why do I behave this way? How will this help me? What else can I learn here? Where else can I find this? We should. That is a powerful lesson. It is also facts-based, right? It is a body of knowledge. It was born out of observation too. So we also need to look around and look for the facts and try to find out what the facts are before we make any inferences, any connections. For instance, I was talking to you briefly about the organization of the Spirits book. The first part, primary causes, it's all about the basic questions. What is God? What's the spirit? What's the soul? What's reincarnation? Is there reincarnation? Right? All those things. Kardec was looking for the building blocks, the context, the beginnings, and upon that, you can build more things. You first need to observe, use your curiosity, get that information, then you can build that body of knowledge on top of that. Part 2 of the Spirits book is, okay, now that there is God, there are spirits, how do they live? How do they interact? Part 2 is called the spirit world. Because if they're spirits, then their interactions and so forth, there must be a world, like a realm on which they can do this. So if we want to understand what the spirit world looks like, we will look at part 2 of the Spirits book. And once we realize, hold on a second, there are spirits, they interact with each other, we just can't see them, but they're here, and they're us without a physical body, and they have lived many times. How does this work? What kind of laws are there that govern how we should behave and act so that we can be happier? Because obviously, if life goes on and I have a beef with you today, I will not be okay when I die because the beef is still there. The problem is still there. So if we have to figure this out, if not in this life, in the next life. So how does all this work? Guess what part 3 is called? Moral laws. Right? A guide to ethical living. Part 4 is, if you act this way, this was what happens. If you act that way, this is what happens. It's called hopes and solaces. It's about the implications of behavior. It gets deeper. And, I kid you not, that is the structure that Kardec follows for the rest of the books that he published. Book 1, Spirits book, you can say that is the primary causes of Spiritism, the building blocks. Book 2, do you remember? The Mediums book. That is about what? The spirit world. How to communicate with that, which matches part 2 of the Spirits book. Book 3 that Kardec wrote was what? The Gospel was explained by Spiritism, which holds the cliff notes for how we should think and behave, which you could equate is part 3 of the Spirits book, Moral Laws, and part 4 of the Spirits book, Hopes and Solace, about what happens when you act one way or the other, is Heaven and Hell. Part 4, which I call the Spiritist soap opera. Because in Heaven and Hell, which celebrates a milestone this year, which the book is largely overlooked, we learn, and the first part is divided in 2 parts. The first part I call Scenes from a Previous Episode, right, in a soap opera, where Kardec basically gives a sort of like a summary of everything else that we've learned before in his books, in case you're coming to that book fresh, right? In part 2, he has testimonials from the Spirit saying, this is how I feel now after I had this kind of life. And so if you want some gossip, or if you want to see some drama, read the communications on the second part of heaven and hell, because you see how some of the spirits come back to us and tell us, I regret this, or I did this well. That is fascinating, right? So there is a structure at play here, and you say, but Daniel, wait. But there is the Genesis, the 5th book that Kardec wrote. Yes, that is when he has all of this, and he goes back to the beginning. He says, okay, now that I've understood all these things, how should I reevaluate the so-called miracles of Jesus, this so-called Bible thing with the Genesis, the starting of life? How should I understand phenomena? We just kind of keep going in the loop of collecting more information and reevaluating things, collecting more information and reevaluating things. So observation is key. Are we doing that in our lives? When somebody says something and says, so-and-so just so mean. They just came and they hate me. And you automatically say, oh my God, that is true. They absolutely hate you because you're such the most wonderful person in the world. We just agree with our friend because we like him. But what are the facts? Is the other person really, really mean? Could there be something else at play? How did you know? What happened? What are the facts? Right? And to your surprise, you may find a different story if you were to ask those questions. I mean, we do that in our society all the time. People who are different than us, just because they watch a different news, vote for a different party, believe in a different system or a different religion, automatically are wrong. I don't know that is particularly aligned with what we propose to do. So what are the facts? Before you get in a fight with your partner, right? Establish the facts. Before you have a conversation with somebody else, think about what do I know and what am I inferring or implying from this? I think that's the Spiritist method that we see. And it is progressive. Progressive because it builds on previous knowledge. That means it's still growing. And aren't we the same? Aren't we building on our previous knowledge and aren't we growing? If we are not growing, we should. Are we seeking new knowledge? It is so convenient just to stay in the books that we like. But how do we push ourselves to expand a little bit, to step a little bit out of our comfort zone, to learn something a little bit different? It doesn't have to be every day, but how are we pushing our edges out a little bit more? Because we continue to progress. That's why we reincarnate. That's why we're here. We're here to learn. If we're not moving, if we're only in this comfort zone, guess what will happen? Something will come and push you out of your comfort zone. Sounds familiar, anyone? Right? Because we're not meant to be stagnant. Hence, we need a method and a way and a mental attitude to look forward and to know that we are progressive. And we should also think about things in an open source way. Are we leading our lives in an open source way that I'm saying, are we open to feedback and input from others? Are we reflective about this? Or do we prefer just to say, nope, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and that's it? Right? How do I collaborate with others? How do I open myself to different perspectives? How can I just be open to the feedback that the universe provides us? Knowing that all of it is for my betterment. It might not be pleasant all the time, but the feedback loop, the experiences we have, are extremely important, because after all, if we keep doing the same thing and the same challenges keep coming back again and again and again, chances are we haven't learned that lesson. So if you find yourself reliving the same problems over and over and over again, then maybe some reflection about what's happening here, what should I learn from this, will be helpful. Right? Spiritism tells us that. It's also flat and democratic. There is no honor, there's no hierarchy. Are we behaving in a way in which we think that we're better than others? Sometimes we do, because we're human. It's good to be better than others. Right? Because if you're better than others, it means that you're better than others. You're right, you're good. Other people suck. Right? I don't know if you guys know this, but the problem with the world is all of you guys. I'm fine. Right? If all of you changed, that would be wonderful. Please change to what I want you to change to. Right? So everybody wants change. Few people want to change. So we got to be open to that idea and understand that we should take input. And it should be very practical too. We should think about, how does this apply to my life? What is the point of us reading these wonderful books, coming over here and listening to people who may or may not be interesting, and then you walk out of here, and the first thing you do when somebody cuts you off in traffic over there is you give them the bird.
Just one finger.
Just one finger, right?
Not the whole finger.
It's not. At least we're not giving the whole hand, right? But you know what I'm saying? So the point here is, you should be asking yourself, how do I walk out of here with some of this to put into practice in my life, in a way that would make me a happier and kinder human being? Because those things are connected, I think. Right? That's why we have this body of knowledge, to be able to give us that insight and that perspective, right? And so, for all of this, it's really about, what is it? Why is it significant, and why does it matter? That's what Spiritism is here to address. It is a tool for us to understand who we are, spirits, immortal spirits, our origin, where we come from God, where we're going to evolution, a better place. We're going to be great. What's our nature? Spiritual, not physical. And how do we interact with this world, but here temporarily? So we should think about that perspective, because that changes the way we live. When we think for the long term, we change the way we act. If there is no other life, right? If you think that way, I understand that you could step on anything to get anything right now. It makes sense. Because after you die, you die. Then let's get it all here now. There's even a not so lovely expression that people say all the time, YOLO. You only live once. Somebody said that to me the other day at the airport, at the plane, and I instantly said, but do we? And I didn't make tons of friends that day, but he was quite puzzled. And I didn't really know him. Like, I was totally eavesdropping too. It was totally my bad. But you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that we have to pay attention to all these and see why it helps. So in many different ways, the DNA of Spiritism is pointing us to these realizations and to these approaches. And I think that is really meaningful. But at the same time, it's important to know that a DNA, or these basic essences, they are influences. They are not determinant. It is up to you to decide how this DNA that you now have will be used or not. No judgment if you don't use it. This is for you. It's a tool. It's not a mandate. And it's individual. So it's about your work. It's not about telling other people what they should do and how they should behave. Because frankly, what you do in your life will not change a lot of my life. And what I do with my life will probably not change a lot of your life. I don't mean to be rude. I'm just calling it out. It's about you and your relationship with life and purpose. So you should get meaning for yourself here. And also, it's always mutating, a DNA, isn't it? Always evolving. So should we. So should our knowledge. So should our understanding. When has it become a vice, a problem, or a character flaw to change our minds when we have new information? Our society sometimes makes, that's not what you said yesterday, or like a year before. Yeah, it was not. A year before, I didn't know this. Now I do. So now that I know better, as Maya Angelou would say, I do better. Right? If we are in constant flux, shouldn't we be changing our minds? We should be changing our minds about some things, maybe not others. Well, what's wrong with changing our minds? The key to success is being flexible and changing our minds when presented with new information. Otherwise, we'll still be in the Stone Age. There will be no air conditioning for us, right? No ice cream. All proofs of the existence of God, by the way. My list of proof of the existence of God is ice cream, air conditioning, indoor plumbing. Big one. Big one, yeah. I don't want to go back to the past. Thank you very much. I'm good right here, right, with my indoor plumbing, my AC. And we can add some more things in there. But those three are big on my book, right? So it's always mutating, and it's also indicative of the past, but not the future. You get to make your own future. Your experiences will not necessarily determine your future. But it's also important that we inherit it to pass it on. And you too inherit all these methods and abilities and insights and knowledge. And it's your responsibility to pass it on. You pass it on to your children. You pass it on to those around you through everyday life. It's not saying sit down and say, let me tell you about Jesus. Or let me tell you about Spiritism. Let me tell you how it works, right? No, it's about you modeling it, embodying these ideas of being facts-based, open to inquiry, collaborative, open source, not hierarchical, all these things is about living it. Because once we get that spot, hit that spot, then I think that we have a much nicer life. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to do in a roundabout way, or not so roundabout, is, hey, there is a really cool message here in Spiritism, how it came about and how it is structured and how it grows, that could be applied to our daily lives. And if we're truly interested in this body of knowledge that keeps changing, it keeps evolving, keeps growing, then we should be open to a deeper investigation of what it really is, who we really are, and how do we make our lives better. At the end of the day, it's about you and the Creator. And so as you have that relationship with the divine, with God, with whatever it is that you want to call, sometimes I like to call it the guiding, organizing, designing principle of the universe, the God, you make your calls. But you have knowledge and you have understanding that you can now replicate. By using this thinking process, you too can make decisions in your life. What are the facts? How do I put them together? What am I to understand of this? Does it make sense? How should I act? What happens if I do this or I do that? That's another tool that Spiritism models to us through its structure that I think is going underutilized. And my hope is that maybe we can pay attention to that moving forward and ask ourselves the question and become scientists in our own lives. And with that, I'm going to stop there because I talk a lot. And if we're willing, I would love to hear from you, and maybe we can engage in some inquiry, right? Much the same way.
I have something to say. I find it very philosophical and scientific. And coming here, and you don't feel judged. I think there's no conduct of behavior that is preached, and I think that's fundamental because philosophy and science is you learn again and you learn again and you go and you repeat. You go back to the past to predict the future. So for me, it's very scientific and philosophical.
I love that. If you need a little bit of judgment, let me know. I'm open. It's one of the services I provide because we're human, right? But I think I love that you're saying that. But I also want to acknowledge that the people might have different experiences too, and that's okay. But I want to be in an environment that is accepting, right? I want to be in that environment. And I love that the Spiritist group is that. Sort of like an oasis in a crazy world, because here, you should come here and say, well, these people are trying to be better. I can try different versions of me. I can try different things here. And people will give me kinder feedback, one way or another, right? Than I would otherwise get outside. So I think it's pretty great. And I take no credit because obviously I'm not part of this group. At least I am like the stepchild. But I'm really happy because makes me happy because I think this is what it should be. It's really great, isn't it? It's like nice. It's where you can breathe.
Yes, could you expand on the concept of open source? Because it's a bit vague to me. How would you contribute to the open source, right?
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. I totally rushed through that too, right? In general. So the way I would look at this, sometimes what we think today is canon, like basic Spiritism, once was not. Right? So for instance, if you ever, a lot of people come to Spiritism by reading the books of Andrea Lewis, like No Solar. Those books, when they were first published in 1947, some people thought they were scandalous. Right? What do you mean there is this umbral thing, there is a spiritual city out there, right? It was not readily accepted. But only after a lot of people start reading them and say, you know what? We see other spirit communications that tell us of the same thing. It was incorporated, right? So today, if you were to write a convincing essay or a piece or do a presentation about something that people haven't thought about, and you were to circulate that enough and people bought into it, you would have contributed to Spiritism that would have become accepted.
But ultimately, there's some sort of committee.
Nope.
No committee.
There's no committee. Isn't that nuts?
I just makes me feel like it would be
a wedding.
Yeah, it feels like very messy, right? It feels like, how is this not coordinated?
Everything actually changed because nobody, to get that many people to agree.
Yeah, and that's why you have such a challenge with Spiritism, because for a lot of people, when they come into Spiritism, they think other Spiritists are doing it wrong because they do it differently, right? But the commedia, so to speak, it's up there, right? So in many different ways, the test of time is also something that endures. So I think it was 1862, Kardec wrote in the Spiritist magazine, the Spiritist Review, which was a monthly magazine that he put forth as was publishing his books, about something that he called the universal control of the spirits. And in it, he said, if we take the idea of God being just, kind, and loving, definition of God, basic style, right? Then God cannot choose some over others because there's no favorite kids for God, right? That means that God would not just give the revelation of what it is to just some people. So he has to kind of give it to everybody out there. So we should always be looking by evidence of that one thing in many different times, cultures, people, because it should be everywhere. So one of the ways in which we look at whether that topic, concept, idea should merit inclusion, so to speak, right? Because there's no officially included, right? Is whether we can see that in many places and many people say, oh, that makes sense. But it has a very operational problem, which is people do different things in Spiritism. There's a big debate about, oh, that's not Spiritist at all, right? There's sometimes some practices that are not Spiritist that kind of come into Spiritism, and for some groups, that's very Spiritist, for others not. That's why sometimes you go from one Spiritist group to another, and they're different. Your experience might not be the same.
I've noticed the same thing. So,
Yeah.
We used to go to Houston, and we would just read through the book.
Yeah.
That was how we did. It was a book study. So
Yeah.
here it's speeches, just different ways of approaching
Different.
it.
Find that which, as a friend of mine, she's very wise. She'll say, you got to pull your own happiness wagon, right? So you got to find what works for you. If the study group works for you, I'm sure they have one, right? But some people like the talk piece. Maybe a mix of both, right? But it is confusing in many ways. So in many ways, its great virtue is also hinders its adoption and dissemination, because it's a lot easier to prepackage something and sell something if it's always the same, right? And Spiritism, it's not all the manifestation of Spiritism. It's not always the same, right? Because what we're doing here is an interpretation of what Spiritism is. You can go somewhere else and somebody might interpret it differently. You can argue that Spiritism still is Spiritism in the absolute, but how I'm interpreting it right now, you should take as a grain of salt, because that's in the method, right? You can say nonsense, dude, right? Very valid, right? But that's an interesting point. That makes it difficult, but I think it makes it beautiful.
Can you tell us more on...
Oh, welcome. I know it's the first time you've come to the group. Thank you, Al.
I'd never heard the 509 in the original edition to 1019.
Yep.
Can you talk through the evolution of that?
Yes. So the Spirits book that we have today is based on Kardec's third edition, right? He put it out. So Kardec had a very much model like this. If we study, for instance, how he came about his books, the creation of the Spirits book was that I'm going to go to a place, I'm going to ask that question, I'm going to go to a different place, I'm going to ask the same question with different mediums to see what I get. And then we're going to go to the third one. And if they jive, I will incorporate that, and then I'm going to organize that, right? But after that, being a very interesting person, he also put out the Spiritist Review. And he would do these essays every month and send it out to subscribers. And people would chime in from all over Europe and the world and provide input. And then he would, I changed my mind. And there's also people sending him results of communications. For instance, there was this guy called Mr. Fortier who sent him something like 11 notebooks of questions and answers that he, Fortier, and others had posed to the spirits in different places. And so Kardec also looked at that. So he was constantly taking information from different places and saying, we have new questions and new things that should be encompassed there. So it's really interesting because we have this tendency to think that, no, this is what it is. No, it changed. Kardec himself continued to evolve. And if he were here today, if he was able to live a life of 200 years of age, I'm sure that I think he would have evolved that too. But I think out of respect and challenge, right, of who gets to continue that work, people said, all right, we'll stop right here at the third edition, and now we have all these different works that add on to it, right? Because after all, we do have other books that he also published.
What was the time span between edition 1 and the third edition?
It was, I think, something like 3 years. Yeah, I think so. I have to go back. I have to look at it. I don't know, to be honest with you, but it was relatively short, because the time that he published this, by 1967, if I'm not mistaken, he passed.
18.
Sorry, thank you, 18, right? So if you think about it, like in a period of 10 years or so, and then after that, it kind of has to go, right, by itself. But it's really interesting. So Spiritism has evolved, and it will evolve. The question is, will we too? I think we're coming our time. Yeah, unless you're...
One more. Can you put the concept, or what I learned as a kid, of the Holy Trinity
Yes.
from a Spiritist perspective? Can you help me?
Triangulate that?
Yeah, please.
Yes. So here's what I know about the Holy Trinity, because that concept also intrigues me. My understanding, by some of the people that I read in the Christian scholarly field, is that the Holy Trinity didn't appear in early manuscripts that we have for the New Testament until about the medieval ages, right? And so the early manuscripts that we have don't have the Holy Trinity in it. What would sometimes happen because the process of translation, the process of dissemination of Christ's work was you write that down on vellum, like skin, right? If you know how to write and read, not everybody did. And how do you make a copy? Xerox machines? No such thing. It's by hand. So you got this monks, learned people, scribes they were called, and their job was to do what? Look over here, right over here. Look, very fun probably the first time you did it, but once you want 10 copies of the same thing, right? So some passages that some historians argue, and they have proof of that, were really little accidents from one copy to the next. Like, for instance, there is I think a part in Paul where Paul says that women should be quiet in church, on the letters of Paul, and they found that the manuscript before a certain point did not have that comment. And then I think one of the monks probably wrote a note in the margins saying that women should be quiet in church. The next scribe just took that and inserted it in the text because he's like, it was there, so I'm going to copy it, right? So things kind of sneak in sometimes into the canon that we don't know. And I have a venture. I think that the Holy Trinity is that, right? But it's an interesting topic, and don't take my word for it, right? Yeah, I think it's sort of time, right?
I can listen to you all night.
Lie to me, baby. Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone.